All right, we are out here just north of Lamar with our group out here, just north of Lamar by Highway 287. Here's our group that's with us today. We've got Joe's with us, Butch, Dad, Bailey, Jeff, and there's C.J, Tim, and Gina. I believe I've got that all right. So, and we're getting ready to head out. And we've got Jeff's dog, Elvis, is with us for the trip too. So we're getting ready to head out.
So just for a little introduction, we're going to be headed out north to the Sand Creek site. And so where the Lodgepole Trail was started at Benson, New Fort, or Fort Lyon, New Fort Lyon. And that was about 8 miles west of here on the Arkansas River, where we are right now. And so the Indians, they went from there to Sand Creek, and that was probably about mid-November, early, something like that. And of course, it was soldiers on November the 28th. So if you can imagine 130 teepees or so on a travois, each on a travois, and being dragged across the prairie, you can kind of imagine what kind of mark that would be left on the ground. And so even in November, even a couple of weeks later, it'd still be very, very clear for the soldiers to follow. But there was one problem, actually two problems. First problem was they were leaving at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Next big problem was there was no moon. It was pitch dark. And so they had to find their way from here 40 miles north, pitch dark, but you know, a trail that otherwise would have been pretty visible. And so we're going to the trail started there 8 miles, and it was going north and east. We'll be going due north. And so there'd be a time out there where the trail would actually cross the road we're going to be on. So we'll kind of point that out to you as we go along. And then something that hardly anybody ever mentions is Robert Bent. He convinced Shivington to turn off the Lodgepole Trail and go more in a northeasterly direction. And we'll show where that was and why. And he played a really big part in this that everybody seems to ignore. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit.
All right, we've got some maps to show you that we'll have here in this video to kind of explain a few things. As we made our way out to the National Park Service Historic Site, we were dealing with a lot of wind that day, so our audio is not usable, unfortunately, from our trip out there and at their site. But we do have some maps here, and I'll just point out a few things. Here's the first map where you can see where Lamar is labeled on the map, and we're starting just a little bit north of Lamar when we take off out by the museum, and we'll be leaving via what we call the May Valley Road, or Road 49, and about 8 miles to the west of there is where the Lodgepole Trail, where we believe where that starts at Bent's New Fort. And we have a line going 40 miles from Bent's New Fort where it intersects at the Lost Sand Creek site, and it is the trail is visible at the Lost Sand Creek site. So we just drew a line down 40 miles where it matches up with descriptions from Robert Bent, and we'll learn a little bit more about that as we see more maps. And it lines up going down to Bent's New Fort. And you can see then even more west from Bent's New Fort is a place called Big Timbers. We have it squared off with a yellow highlight around there, and George Bent said that they called that Tall Timbers as well, and this was a favorite camping spot for the Indians. And this is according to George Bent's, from his letters, where this Big Timbers was located. So that's kind of giving some information there on where Big Timbers was located. And as you get to the top of the map, as we make our way to the site, you can see the lakes at the top of the map. This is getting right into Kiowa County. And as we look at the second map, you can see as we continue on Road 49, we see over at the lakes, and this is where Robert Bent attempted to lead the soldiers through the lakes to wet the ammunition. Now, we don't know how successful he was in this, but it was an attempt by him to get the ammunition wet so it would not be as effective when they got to Sand Creek. So you can see that there. And as you come up Road 49, it's the red mark there, and it crosses the Lodgepole Trail there. And then the Lodgepole Trail continues on toward the Lost Sand Creek site. And then the blue road there is marked as Highway 96, just kind of showing where that is there. And then Road 49 continues on north, and we can get to the next map here. And so as Road 49 continues on, it crosses Highway 96. And if you were traveling Highway 96, if you're going from this spot, you're going west, you would go to Eads. If you're going east, you would get to the town of Shivington. And as you can see here, the Lodgepole Trail, the yellow line, continues on. And the Lodgepole Trail will eventually cross Road W. And you also will see Road 49. It goes up, it goes over to the east, and then back up, and then that's Road 50. And then it goes up, and then going to the east is Road W. Road W will then go out to the National Park Service site. And you can see there off Road W, and then the Road W is the red line, and the Lodgepole Trail is the yellow line. And then forking off of that, you can see where the soldiers turned off the Lodgepole Trail, and then just kind of going at an angle there. And you'll see it a little bit better in another map, but there is a ridge there, and that's where we're pointing with that arrow for the National Park Service site. There's the ridge there that's very important to the Sand Creek story. And you can also see as that yellow Lodgepole Trail line goes up, you'll see where it's marked with Little Bear. And this is the spot he saw soldiers as a long black line. And I believe we'll explain that a little bit more on this slide here. So we see this map here as we continue on. You get a little bit more information. It's a little bit more detailed and zoomed in. This is just zoomed in more from where we were. But I'm going to point out here right at the bottom of this map where you see where the Lodgepole Trail crosses, where the red and yellow line cross, and that yellow line where they turned off the Lodgepole Trail goes off at an angle. Just right there, you see Du Bois sees fleeing Indians. So there's a soldier, Jim Du Bois, and he had gotten separated from his horse when his horse gave out. It just, turned off from that Lodgepole Trail and turned off to go up towards that, on that ridge. Well, his horse gave out, and he was then on foot. Well, while he was on foot, he was in a situation, not a very great situation to be in, but he was able to see fleeing Indians. And you see our arrow there going down. He looked to the west, and he saw fleeing Indians heading out of the village. And he's able to count them, and I believe he saw 75 horses, with 9 of those horses carrying what he said 2 Indians each. But as we talk about in this video, you'll see why we believe that second person for each of those 9 horses was actually a captive and likely dressed as an Indian. But we believe he saw at least 9 captives leaving the village with the Indians. And that is how they would move captives out of camps, out of their villages, was they would move them on horses. So that is how they would do that. And as we come over, as we're going over on the map, you can see Road W going over as the red line. And as that yellow angular line goes over to the spot where we mark the NPS site and Halbert's Ridge. And so Irving Halbert was a soldier that fought at Sand Creek, and he provided a very, one of the best clues of all with the searching for Sand Creek. And he said that when the soldiers arrived, they reached the top of a ridge and then saw way off in the distance a large Indian village about 2 to 3 miles away. And so he said from that spot they could see the camp scattered out along the creek, and it was a very large and long camp. Again, like I said, about 2 to 3 miles long, so way up the creek. And you can see where it marks there, where we believe about the spot where the Arapaho camp would have been. They were at the edge of the village, and as you go up, the Cheyenne would have been camped along there, between there and where we label Black Kettle's village, and even beyond there. And then again, right below where we have Black Kettle Village, we mark the hill where Little Bear was on when he saw the soldiers appear as a long black line. So early that morning, on November 29, 1864, Little Bear got up very early in the morning and crossed the creek to go get his horse. Well, in doing so, he looked south towards the Lodgepole Trail from this hill, and he saw the soldiers appear as a long black line. And so he looks toward that lodgepole trail, and you can see where that crosses there, where they turned off that lodgepole trail, and where that line is just kind of angles off there. You see the soldiers turn off lodgepole trail. Well, he sees them about not too far from the point where they turned off as they're going along that ridge, and he sees them. So that's a good, at least 2 miles away. That gives the Indians a bit of a head start, as they know at that point that the soldiers are coming in to attack and fight. And so they see them from at least 2 miles away when he sees them turn off that lodgepole trail on that line that angles over to where we point with the NPS site and Halbert's Ridge. And though at the National Park Service site they did not find any period artifacts below that bluff, not any battle-related artifacts or village-related artifacts, that ridge is very important because that's the spot where the soldiers rode up and first saw the Indian village of Black Kettle's village. So it's a very important landmark for the Sand Creek story. I also want to just point out here, because we had talked about Robert Bent earlier, and so this is really important to note. So as you see here on the map, where that lodgepole trail and it crosses Road W, and you see that yellow line angle off where Robert Bent led the soldiers off and turned off the lodgepole trail. So this is very important why he did this, because at this spot, from the spot where Little Bear sees the soldiers, this spot on the ridge here where the soldiers turn off the lodgepole trail is about 85 feet higher than that spot where Little Bear was. And so what this does is it puts the soldiers as kind of a silhouetted view. This is just before the sun's not quite up yet. It's still pretty dark out. And so it puts the soldiers in a silhouetted view along the horizon on this ridge. And so they're about 85, maybe a little bit more than that, about 85 feet higher at least. And so the Indians can see them, but they're kind of in a spot where they're kind of more hidden, and the soldiers don't see them right away, but the Indians see them first. And so this gives really the Indians that opportunity to start fleeing the village. And so what Robert Bent did here was pretty remarkable in his attempt to try to put the soldiers in line of being seen. And it's important to note that Bent had two brothers in the camp, George and Charlie. And so, he was not a willing guide to do this. And so it's important to note Robert Bent taking the soldiers off the lodgepole trail. And so these are just some maps to kind of explain kind of the route out there and to kind of show kind of what we saw, some historic events from Sand Creek. And since we didn't have the audio from the trip, we do have these maps to show you to kind of explain what happened that day. All right, we're back here in Lamar, and we're here and joined again with C.J. and Gina, and Butch is with us, and Joe's here, and we're going to just kind of talk about some of the artifacts that were found at the Lost Sand Creek site, and some that we believe had belonged to captives that we think were at Sand Creek. So we're just going to talk about some artifacts and some stuff that was found here, and we'll kind of just let you guys look at some of these, kind of just pass these around to you, and you can see there's a variety of artifacts there. We've got arrowheads. There's a knife in there, and part of a pocket knife. And then there's, you can also see, yep, there's a boot heel cap. There's harmonica pieces. The also interesting thing with the arrowheads is by 1860s, they were using metal arrowheads. They were no longer using stone, at least there at Sand Creek with Cheyenne and Arapahoe. Stone arrowheads would be a lot older, but with the metal arrowheads, they would often make them or trade for them, and sometimes they would make them from like the hoop that went around a barrel, like the water barrel hoops, and they would make arrowheads out of those. So those are kind of some more of like the battle and some village-related stuff there, and just showing kind of what the arrowheads look like. We're going to get to some what we might probably consider the really interesting stuff as far as captive stuff would be related. If you want to just kind of pass that back. And then there's this case right here. And there's a lot of pieces in here that we believe would have belonged to a captive. You're going to see, I'm going to point these out first. These are buttons from, I believe it was a woman's dress. And then we saw a picture in your video of Lucy, or I think it was Lucy, before she was captured. And there's buttons on her dress. I think will look a lot like those. Yeah. So those buttons are definitely look like buttons from a dress. There's like a little heart-shaped, is that, I don't know if that's a ring or that is a, it's a button.
You can open
it too.
Look at those more closely.
Oh. Sit this down over here. So you go ahead and pick up anything you'd like. Just kind of a
see what it says on it?
Heart-shaped button there.
Oh my goodness. No, but it definitely would be readable.
There's little pieces like something like this could have been a piece of jewelry where
oh, definitely.
It's
can I hold it?
absolutely. You can pick up anything that's in there.
Actually pretty ornate.
Yeah, very much so. So we don't know.
And then the ring. Oh my gosh. Oh.
And you can see this piece, the gold piece.
Oh, it does.
And I might not be. I might have it.
You guys, all these tiny pieces.
Always in digging for artifacts, most of the things were about 2 to 3 inches deep. Exceptions for a few things, but everything was an individual dig.
Oh gosh.
And you think, these things are probably pretty close together, but to be able to find the matching pieces on that is pretty incredible. So
it is very incredible, and I kind of think it's a button because of the 2 holes there. I can just imagine sewing that up, and it may have had a little piece of cloth or something.
And there's this kind of like somewhat of a ring. It's large, so I don't know if this would have fit. Because I don't know.
It may have been repurposed. The Indians might have repurposed it. It could have been something, not even jewelry to begin with.
And that piece there, well, sort of
been a button of some sort. So it's kind of large. So I don't know.
Of course, they took a lot of women's clothing, and even the men in the camp would wear them. They would wear their bonnets and their silk.
George Bent talks
absolutely
about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Raided a train and would bring all the clothing and stuff into their camp.
And all the fine silk.
And they'd be wearing fine silk shirts and stuff.
And Laura Roper said that one of her skirts was turned into a shield from the sun for an infant. And so they would use it, stretch it over different things and come up with so many different uses. But she said the most heartbreaking thing was seeing her father's jacket in the camp worn by a warrior. And she didn't know if her parents had survived the attack. And she didn't know for a long time. So I'm sure that was distressing to see her personal, and her mother's green velvet hat was being worn by one of the warriors. And it must have been very distressing to not know if her family was alive.
Yeah, because she didn't know they were alive or dead.
There's a good possibility that some of these belongings were belonged to those captives from the Little Blue River attack and the Plum Creek.
How many total captives did Black Kettle have at Sand Creek?
We know for certain that Lucinda, our great-great-grandmother, was taken captive and was taken to Sand Creek. She was in the Cheyenne camps, and as they moved and they went to Sand Creek, they also were with Two-Face, who was a Sioux, and Blackfoot, who were Sioux. They were sub-chiefs of the Sioux and were in their camps right there at Sand Creek. So what Gina is saying is certainly some of these could indeed be even some of Lucinda's things. And this, I believe, honestly, this could be Laura Roper's simply because she was in the camp with them too, but not at Sand Creek. This signet ring most likely could even have belonged to Laura Roper who was taken captive at the same time our great-great-grandmother, Lucinda Eubank, was, along the Little Blue on the Oregon Trail in southern Nebraska. And she was forced, they ripped it off her finger, off of Laura Roper's finger, and they kept it. So this could very well have belonged to Laura Roper. She was certainly in the camps, not at Sand Creek. Lucinda, our great-great-grandmother, was at Sand Creek, but Laura Roper was released. Wynkoop had them released prior to that.
Their travels started after the military came into the camp on Hackberry Creek at Big Timbers, and they were negotiating for the release of the prisoners. So when you asked, how many prisoners, the ones that were released were Laura Roper and our great-great-grandmother's daughter, Isabel, and her nephew, who was Ambrose Asher, along with Danny Marble, who was taken at the same time as Nancy Morton. And I've often wondered if they didn't, on their travel south, also come through Sand Creek again. It was used frequently. And then they continued on south, trying to outrun the military. So you think about Sand Creek itself, where you guys found this, there has to be some continuity, thinking about where did they go. We know they were here and at one point, but down here at another. Did they pass through twice? Did they pass through again? Did they? Because we know that by November they had gone south into Nebraska territory and were already back up to spend the winter at St. So I like where my imagination goes with your artifacts, because who else's could it be?
I have a question. From when they were taken captive to when they were released, what's the span of time? Do you know?
Okay. The attack occurred on August 7th, 1864, and then Wynkoop was able to secure the release of some of the hostages in September. So it would be around the 11th of September, and brought them to Fort Lyon. And then from there, they traveled on with some chiefs to meet with the governor and with Colonel Shivington in Denver at the Camp Weld Council.
And do you have any idea what their demeanor was? Were they in shock? Were they happy to be out? Were they?
Well, I think we need to discuss who was actually released at that time. It wasn't Lucinda. What happened was they negotiated the release of Danny Marble, little boy, Ambrose Asher, Lucinda's nephew, Isabel, who was 3, her daughter, and not Lucinda, but Laura Roper. So those 4 they negotiated. They told them that they had Nancy Morton and Lucinda Eubank in another camp off somewhere. So they take them into Denver. In the meantime, as they're doing that, negotiating with them, they're holding Lucinda and Nancy under buffalo robes, and Black Kettle tells his squaws if they murmur a word, anything, held them at knife point, and that's where they were. This is written testimony in Nancy Morton's manuscript.
Yeah, so their demeanor, Joe, as far as when they were released,
Yeah.
Laura was so upset that she could not stop crying. And even Chief Left Hand, who had held her, held her during the captivity, he said, you need to stop crying, because they would chastise children and any women that would even think of crying. And but fortunately, she was able to get into a situation where she felt a little bit safer, settled down a little, but she didn't talk much. The only thing I can think of is that maybe Silas Soule was able to bring her out of her kind of shock and trauma.
Okay.
Our the little nephew, Ambrose Asher, Major Wynkoop described him as being very reticent when he first rode up on an Indian pony, and he was still very traumatized by the death of his grandfather and his young uncles right in front of him. So there were definitely varying reactions. Now, Danny Marble, not related to our family, when he was released, he's like, bully for you, you've done this, soldier man, thank you so much. Can I keep this pony? So he definitely had a different reaction, and had probably been treated as one of the boys in the camp. Um, and so I think with the women, it was very difficult to even comprehend being in the middle of where we were today and then being even farther east of there and still not feeling safe. And to truth be known, they weren't necessarily safe. The Indians had sent 500 warriors to surround the 167 soldiers that Wynkoop had brought with him out of the fort to secure the release of the prisoners. And the Indians, the Cheyenne in particular, were very aggressive and would ride around their little camp and then like shove sand and dirt and garbage into their cannons and steal their food. They were having such a big time that word reached the council that Wynkoop was having with the big Indian chiefs, and Black Kettle actually rode out to stop the warriors from attacking this poor contingent of soldiers. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting thing that we had learned about. They had to move, the soldiers were so terrified that they had to move their camp 12 miles further. And it's amazing they even stuck and waited around until Wynkoop and Sol got back out of that camp with news of the pending release of maybe a prisoner. But they were,
indeed, they were.
And there was a slight mutiny of, we're heading back, that we can't wait any longer. And so fortunately that was staved off till they got there and
they moved.
Yeah.
And back on that August when they were captured, I'm sure there was also a lot more fear due to they weren't all captured, some were killed.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that if you can. Because there were family members of Lucinda that were killed, and not just captured.
Yeah, the Eubank family suffered losses in 3 different places. So historians struggled quite a bit with this for a long time. And so we discovered that Kiowa Station, which is over by current day Hebron, Nebraska, that was where we call him Uncle Joe. It would have been our grandmother's brother-in-law. He was a stage driver, and Kiowa Station was a stage stop. And so he was there, just had developed a home and a store, and was out gathering hay in the late summer because they sold it to all the pioneers and all the freighters and all the military that were coming across. And so he was there with Lucinda's other brother-in-law named Fred. He was probably about 17 or 18 years old. And Fred was working with his brother Joe. And so both of them lost their lives. That would be the Kiowa Station attack. Then there was the Eubank Ranch, which would be Lucinda's husband, William, and his father had a claim just south of the Oregon Trail. So one was north, one was south. They were connected. And so we imagine their homes were probably right there along the trail. They were road ranches. And so we think that at that time, we probably lost William, which was Lucinda's husband, his sister Medora, who struggled against the Indians. They were trying to take her captive, and it must have been pre-agreed upon that she would be taken. And they couldn't keep her on the horse, so she was killed and scalped. And then there were young sons. So William and Joseph had younger brothers, and both of them were killed. One killed possibly there right at William Eubank's ranch, but the grandfather, who had long whiskers and a bald head, he had taken some of the boys with him to go help with the haying. He was struck by the attackers at Oak Grove Ranch, or near there, because he was in a wagon and had the boys with him. So his little grandson Ambrose was taken captive, but he lost his son James, who was probably about 13 at the time. And he was brutally killed. And it was a surprise attack out of the tall Nebraska grass. One distracted him with, can I have tobacco? And then before you know it, all these warriors are popping up out of the grass and killed the family. Lucinda, I am sure, witnessed the death of her husband, William. I think their little girl, Isabel, witnessed it as well, because he had hidden his family in a buffalo wallow. And they had shoved a rag in little Belle's mouth. And the baby, of course, they just kind of held it tight and hoped for the best. But when they noticed that Belle couldn't breathe, they took it out and she screamed. Because the warriors, painted warriors with all these weapons, were frightening. But she also was terrified at losing her dad. And so I'm sure she probably witnessed that as well. So all in all, that day, 7 family members lost their lives within a few minutes at 3 different places.
That's horrible.
And little Belle was taken, and she wandered the Indian camps, very large Indian camps, by herself. You know, they said, Laura Roper said, every time I see her, she's got a different pair of shoes on. But she followed the kids, and they must have been kind of plinking their toy arrows at her, and, you know, their small arrows, because she had 3 pretty deep wounds. But I think if it was an adult warrior, they probably would have ended her. But I think that being, you know, trying to follow the kids, she was the subject of some abuse there. And then the squaws, I think they were pressing arrowheads. If we could even look at one, just so you can get an idea of what that would be like, to take an arrowhead and press that into the back of a 3.5-year-old little girl with long golden curls. Little Isabel Eubank was released in Denver after her captivity of about a month. And the doctors examining her and the family that took her in, they reported that she had so many little arrow wounds on her back. And the arrows had been pressed into her skin by the squaws. We suspect maybe she was crying too much. So there were also 3 very deep arrow wounds that the doctors attempted to treat, but we think that there could have been some sepsis and infection that just continued on. So that taken in August, released in September, and even with their good care in Denver, by March 18th, she was gone.
Yeah. So do either of you happen to know, like when the captives were in the Indian villages, did they ever dress them like the Indians, or?
Most definitely so. A lot of times they would leave their clothes on them, but by the time, and they would just be rags. I think Lucinda ended up at, on her way back, she had to change her clothes because, who was it at Bordeaux's? Was it?
Oh,
You remember?
yeah, she was being taken in for to be released at Fort Laramie by the Sioux chief Two-Face.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, she'd been traveling with the Indians for probably 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
She would have lost her dress by that time. And yet I think that she found skins to make things for her baby to wear and stay warm. And she was said to be just in almost just a little shift. And it was scandalous because her legs were showing when she came to the fort. But the first contact with civilization was at Bordeaux Trading Post. So Two-Face went in there because he was trusting that perhaps Big Mouth, who was now chief of the police for the Sioux that were camped around the fort, that perhaps he could safely get her in, or get himself and her into Fort Laramie, and then possibly get a reward to take back to his camp. And so he was counting on Big Mouth, who was at the trading post. So at that point, we did learn that some of the traders' wives, Mrs. Farnham, John Farnham in particular, managed to find her a spare dress to wear. So that was one thing that we learned. But the interesting thing that made me think of when you asked your question is that the women in particular in the camp during captivity liked to dress the women. And they would paint their faces with red and blue and braid their hair, and put feathers and coins and put things all over them to just like kind of dressing them up. And then the descriptions were quite just plainly indicating it was for the pleasure of creating Indians out of the white women, possibly. Of course, we suspect there were different meaningful connotations to the colors of paint they were using. And there were times when Lucinda and Nancy would be brought together and they didn't even know each other because they were so disguised. And so I'm assuming they probably had Indian clothing sometimes.
Yes,
There's a reason I asked that, because that's when we were making our stops on the way to the National Park Service site earlier. We talked about that soldier Jim DuBois. He had gotten a lot, his horse gave up, and he was on foot. Around a very good situation to be in, but he was able to see and look west and see, Indians leaving, I guess, get towards that lodgepole trail, going to the south instead of to the north. But when he saw it was like 75 horses and 9 horses carrying what he said 2 Indians each. But that's how they would move captives, and so it would make sense to us that the captives were dressed a certain way. It looked like the Indians.
In
So,
Indian garb,
and,
yep.
and I've always suspected that, so that's why I asked.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
And it was so cold on the day of the attack that her summer dress just couldn't, and it had been ripped and torn and
Because they wouldn't
bloodied.
have had other clothes.
They
so-
wouldn't have had
nothing.
it. And I don't think that the natives would have provided the clothing that they had taken and stolen and gathered together. Those were for them. And the bolts of cloth, that was for them. So I think they probably were dressed, and it was probably hard to distinguish them.
I would like to just have Joe share for a few minutes. He's found a lot of stuff out there. I don't know what you want to start with, Joe. We've got a couple pieces here, and there's a few pieces we have in bags behind you over there. And I know that's stuff that you like to talk about.
I've been going out with Chuck, as you know, for a long time. I'm always just amazed. We dig stuff up, and that guy over there knows what everything is. And how did you go to school for this? You can't have a dictionary anyway. We're metal detecting and not finding much at all. And it's hot. I'm ready to go. We meet on a little cow trail, and the cow trail is about like that. And it's definitely warm. And Chuck puts his metal detector down, and it goes off. So I'm digging, and I come up with this.
You can take it out too.
That star. And I said, Chuck, what on earth is this star? And anyway, immediately he says, star tobacco. What are you talking about? Well, in today's world, guys have tobacco in a little round can, and they keep it in the back of their pocket or their jeans, and you can see the ring. Back then, Chuck said, it came in a cube. It was wrapped up. The name of the tobacco was Star Tobacco, and that's an emblem, and that represented the product that they sold, Star Tobacco at that time.
Oh my gosh. Good job, Chuck.
And I thought that was just amazing to me.
It is amazing. It is. Wow.
It had just rained, and Chuck informed me that when it rains, our metal detectors work better, and I was all happy. And mine goes off, and I dug and dug, and this thing was deep. Michael talks about 2 or 3 inches. This thing was deep, like
Oh my
8+ inches deep, and it's the spur from, I would assume, a trooper. And it was at the site, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm riding a horse, I don't want to lose mine. Was he running for his life? Was he trying to run down a brave? Here we go. What's the story? Where's the little thing in the back? Did he kick the horse so hard that the actual spur, I don't know what to call it, but the spur is missing? Was it?
They're called rowels.
Okay, thank you. And again, what's the story? My mind's just going, and it was so deep.
Wow.
It
8
was
inches.
so deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Butch, would you consider that an enlisted man's spur?
Real early.
Real early, because it's different from the other one that we saw. So the rowel would attach right in here and
The
spin.
rowel would be right in here.
And then the leather would attach here and wrap around their boot. Oh, that was a great find.
It was.
All intact like that.
I'll always remember that.
I
But
bet.
I would, gosh,
Wow.
just
What's
what's the
the
story
story?
once again?
How did it get there?
Yeah, and then 2 more. Okay, so we're out, and I find these little things. What on earth are they? They're metal. What are they? The Indian maidens used to wear those, and they were decoration, Michael, or it was just part of the little cones, the little tinklets.
Cone tinklers, yeah, they wore them on their
Oh, yes.
Okay,
They did.
and I'm thinking, gosh, were these Indian maidens running for their life? Why would they lose something like that? I mean, we all lose stuff, but there was just quite a few of them in one spot. What's the story? Chuck and I were driving out, and Chuck was driving, I think, 112 miles an hour that day. Not really, that's a lie. But we were going out there, and this was on his dash. I'm intrigued by this thing. What is this? I picked it up. Please hold it for a second and give it back. Okay, here we go. I think you would agree it's heavy. So I proceeded to get the story. This is a part of a cannonball. And inside it were, I think, 28 to 32 little metal pieces that would fracture and kill and maim and hurt people. And Chuck told me it had a fuse. We got a fuse in here. He explained how it worked, and it could go off at certain heights. It was just, even though it happened a long time ago, I was just amazed at the technology at that time that these little things had. So we show up in the pickup, and immediately Chuck said, "See that stake?" He had drove a stake in the ground like a fence post. Yeah. And from our pickup at that point, it was 50 or 60 yards out there. He said, "That's where I found this." Oh, okay. I don't know. In my mind, that was very interesting. I thought that was very neat. So we're metal detecting. When Chuck and I are out there, we usually put flags down, and then we go usually side by side. We used to, not too much anymore, but we go in a straight line, put our flags down, scoot over, put new flags, and come back. So we're just not randomly going everywhere. We're just actually casing the area pretty good. So I'm going, beep, 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 beep. Okay, I'm excited. What could it be? I'm digging down, and again, the thing I found was fairly deep. And for once in my life, I knew what I dug up. Guess what? This is it. This is the one that I dug up, and I knew it was part of a cannonball. I called Chuck over, and again, he takes a picture, GPSs it, and oh my gosh, we put a little flag down where it was. Chuck put it in. He carries a little nail belt, and he put it in there. So we get finished. We're driving home, and I'm intrigued. Chuck, let me see the piece I found. So he gets in his belt and he hands it to me, and I get the one on the dash. And oh my gosh, and all of a sudden I put them right here.
Oh my God.
They fit perfect. From where Chuck got his to where I found mine was over a football field apart.
Wow.
And you can see. Look at that.
It's perfect match.
It is.
I mean,
That's remarkable.
It is.
That's why you do these things.
Yes.
and I thought,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. But for just a little while in my life, I felt knowledgeable like Chuck because I knew what I
It was
found.
fine. Should we hold
Well,
that up?
Yes.
That's just amazing.
Oh, I didn't put it
Okay.
together right.
Okay. Just come on the inside. Do the X.
Okay.
There
All
we
right.
go.
There we go.
You got that right there? Okay. You got the snap right there, snaps up. And then on the carbine, the small short, they have a ring attached on a bar. And then you take that carbine, it hangs on you. And you pick it up, snap it on there.
Yeah.
And then it'll just hang on you. And the barrel goes through a carbine boot that gets strapped on your D-ring on the saddle. That goes in the top of a canteen, and that cork goes down in there. That's the top of it's Civil War, 1860 issue canteen. The tin canteen was covered with cloth, and they had stoppers that went into them. This is
how they changed the nipple on a musket.
Mhm.
And
So cool to think that we could be actually looking. You know, you never know. These could have come off of Lucinda's dress. This could be Laura Roper's signet ring.
Something from Nancy Morton,
Something from Nancy Morton.
and those,
Anna Schneider. You just don't know.
all of their items were carted off, so
Yeah.
it would have come this way,
So
all the way
cool.
from Nebraska.
Yeah.
Made it into your ranch.
Yeah.
It's vast, it's huge, it's empty, and it's probably looks a lot like it did 160 years
It
ago.
really hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed at all. It's
'cause-
never been farmed or anything.
No.
It hasn't.
Wow.
No, never been farmed.
It's just, I don't know how you could, if somebody came back from that day, they would recognize everything. The creek banks haven't changed.
These relics are a treasure, and they sure tell you a lot about where Sand Creek took place.
Yep, there can't be any question. And
No.
where they were camped.
Right.
It's not just battle
Right.
relics. There's a lot of village artifacts in this collection. So
Mhm.
it really shows, where they were camped and
Mhm.
where they, there was running battle areas. They did have that head start,
Mhm.
according to George Bent. And it matches with where he found artifacts. He says, they saw the soldiers from miles away. And,
Mhm.
yeah, and it would make sense. They would, try to get out of the village.
Mhm.